Sony, Marvel, Tom Holland wants to make many more Spider-Man movies if they're done and written correctly. Now, I'm a huge Spider-Man fan, especially the comics, and I'm here to tell you what you should do for the next Spider-Man trilogy. So starting off with the next Spider-Man movie, Spider-Man 4, or the first one of this trilogy, this movie needs to ground the character a bit. I think you have two big options here. One, you can go with one of the many classic Kingpin-centered stories that is heavily focused with New York street crime involving the underground and the mob. In this story, you can tie in Daredevil and maybe even bring in Luke Cage and Jessica Jones. And since they love to use multiple villains in Spider-Man movies, you can bring in Tombstone as well and the Enforcers, possibly even the Scorpion since he kind of was already teased in Homecoming. What I like about this idea is that you detach Spidey from the MCU dependency. You wouldn't have the Iron Man Jr. trope anymore. You'd have a full-on New York adventure Spider-Man. But what I don't like about this idea is the fact that if you go with the Kingpin route, bringing in like a Hell's Kitchen showdown and all that, you kind of have to rope in Daredevil, Luke, Jessica, and maybe even Iron Fist, which would be super fun to watch. But for it to be the first Spider-Man movie where we would get to see a pure Spider-Man adventure, it may be too many characters to focus on. On top of all that, I feel like this film needs to do a lot of setting up, specifically three things. Number one, it needs to set up Noel and a symbiote storyline for Spider-Man 5. Noel is talked about a lot for this Spider-Man 4 film, but as I said in my previous video, Noel and the possible Tom Hardy Venom tie-in is all too much too soon, I think. Noel and the symbiote storyline crossing over is something that needs to happen, but not quite yet. I think it needs a small build-up, and I think that needs to be teased in this film. Plus, if we do get a Secret Wars before Spider-Man 5, it can kind of pay homage to the source material, because in Secret Wars, the original one in the 80s, is where Spider-Man first got the symbiote. So the timeline is kind of like a fun little Easter egg, I guess, for comic readers. And two, this film needs to set up the Hobgoblin for the sixth film, the last movie in this trilogy and possibly the last Tom Holland Spider-Man movie. And I'll get to that in the last portion of this video. And three, this film needs to introduce Black Cat. She needs to be the secondary focus of the film and either start a romance with Peter towards the end of the film or tease it for the next one. So because this movie needs to do all of these things, I don't think that a big New York gang war that will likely need to involve all these other street level heroes would work out for what the film needs to set up and accomplish. The villain of this film, I believe, needs to be the Chameleon, and your secondary villain will be Black Cat. See, the Chameleon in his own right can be extremely dangerous, not to the degree of most of the other Spider-Man villains, but in his context of where we're heading, I think it works. Just kind of think about it. Peter is in a dark place, he's alone, no one remembers him, and the city is back to wondering who he is and if he's even a good guy. I suspect we see a classic Jameson rhetoric trashing Spider-Man and having the city be split on whether he's good or bad. You throw in the Chameleon impersonating Spider-Man and committing crimes, messing with Peter's mental state after everything he's recently gone through. I think putting in effort into correctly writing this story can be a great, thrilling, and enticing tale. You also throw in Black Cat's shenanigans, and maybe at the end of the film, you see Black Cat team up with Spider-Man to stop the Chameleon, and that's where you see the romance start to spark between the two. We should also maybe see kind of like a Ned turning on Spider-Man, possibly because of the Chameleon's actions, and Ned maybe no longer sees Spider-Man as good, or he's maybe conflicted by it. Maybe Peter as Spidey accidentally screws Ned over somehow, planting the seeds. Or should I say planting the leads?
This guy stinks!
At the end of the film, we should see Venom himself make an appearance. It can end on like a cliffhanger with Eddie Brock revealing himself and warning Peter that Noel is coming, whether it's a new Eddie Brock or Tom Hardy. So we can start off the fifth movie with a recap of how Venom and Tom Hardy's Eddie Brock got to New York and in this Peter Parker's timeline. Or if we get a new actor portraying a new Eddie Brock, we can start off the movie with a bit of his background story. And we can also maybe get a little bit of background on this specific Noel, because we know that it's not going to be exactly how the comic book Noel is going to be portrayed. So just give us a background of how this one kind of came to be. And so I'm discussing this assuming that this movie takes place after Secret Wars. So without spoiling too much of the Secret Wars 2015 comics that I'm sure the Avengers movie will be based on, it would essentially end the multiverse, and that's a possible way to rope in Tom Hardy's Venom into this universe. Or it could also negate Tom Hardy's timeline, and that's how we get introduced to a whole new Venom. Either way, this movie can focus on Noel starting a huge symbiote takeover, wanting to engulf the world in darkness, starting with New York, since that's where Venom would be. Maybe to a degree of what happens in Spider-Man 2 for the PS5, something kind of similar to that. In this film, you can also make Black Cat and Spider-Man romance official by the end of it. You can have Black Cat assist Spidey and Venom, or maybe she deals with being taken over by a symbiote herself, and by the end of it is saved by Peter. This movie can and should end the entire symbiote storyline altogether. And while that pains me to say because I love Venom, but with the atrocities that were the 3 Venom movies, I kind of hope that the character gets shelved so that they can bring him back and done properly down the line. So Spider-Man 6 needs to be the showdown that comic fans have speculated since hearing Ned Leeds would be a main character in Tom Holland's Spider-Man. And who can forget this line?
Promise you, I won't turn into a supervillain and try to kill you.
So this is where my lack of screenwriting skills will be obvious. I'm not entirely sure how to effectively go about making this work seamlessly. You need to take the lovable and kind-hearted Ned that we've known and turn him into the insane and sinister Hobgoblin. This movie needs to be emotional. And because at this point the MCU Ned Leeds character is so different from the comics, and even in the comics the way that Ned Leeds is tied into the Hobgoblin character gets kind of convoluted. I think that Sony and Marvel have free range on how they choose to connect the story, and I have hope that they can find good enough writers to properly piece together an ultimate showdown between these 2 characters. I also think that Black Cat and Peter Parker romance ends here, and we're teased with the real Mary Jane. Or they do something dumb like they reveal that Zendaya's MJ had her name changed early on or something, and her real name all along was Mary Jane and not Michelle Jones. And most importantly, I think that they introduce the live action Miles Morales. Tom Holland is on record saying that he would love to do to Miles Morales what Iron Man did for his character. So I really do think that Miles Morales gets introduced here, or possibly even the last movie. Whether he appears earlier in this film and teams up with Pete and he gets the mantle passed down to him that way, or maybe he's just introduced at the end of the movie and maybe we get a live action Miles Morales movie that has Tom Holland's Spider-Man make an appearance as a mentor of sorts, possibly with Pete starting up Parker Industries and Miles becoming the main Spider-Man by the end of this debut film. So let me know how you feel about what I think the movie storylines should be. I really would love to hear your thoughts on what you think is next for Tom Holland's Spider-Man.